Good afternoon, members of the public. We'll be starting here in about 3 minutes for the Remember and Explore Subcommittee. I ask that all members of the public please disable your cameras now for bandwidth issues and mute your microphones. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good
My name
morning.
is Good morning. My name is Renee Yates. Welcome to the Remember and Explore Subcommittee meeting of the Advisory Committee on Arlington National Cemetery. I am the committee's designated federal officer, and this is a virtual meeting. Present with me in support are the alternate designated federal officer, Mr. Matt Davis, and Major Papa Vasiliou, Office of Army Cemetery Strategic Planner. This is a virtual open subcommittee meeting pursuant to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012 as codified in 10 U.S.C. 7723. The subcommittee operates under the authority and provisions of the Federal Advisory Committee Act of 1972, Chapter 10, 5th U.S. Code, and the Sunshine in Government Act of 1976. Arlington National Cemetery is the agency which receives the benefit of the committee's advice and recommendations. ANC provides the designated federal officer, nominated by the executive director and appointed by the administrative assistant to the Secretary of the Army. ANC will also provides administrative support to the committee. Subcommittee members are reminded that they are not to conduct formal business by deliberating on a substantive matter which is already before the committee for a vote as a whole. For the committee members present, that is not an issue today. Today is more information meeting than it is substantive. Nothing today is actually formally before the full committee for vote. Additionally, the subcommittee will report to the committee any recommendations or information relevant from today's work. Once again, this meeting is open to the public. However, members of the public are not allowed to present questions from the floor or speak to any issue under discussion by the committee without prior approval from the chairperson. If you've not already done so, I would ask all of our public guests to ensure their cameras are inactive and their microphones are muted until called upon. The public joining us virtually is asked to place their name in the chat in order for us to record their participation in this open public meeting. This meeting is being recorded and minutes will be provided, summary minutes will be provided. If a member of the public seeks to be recognized, please do so by raising your hand feature and wait to be called upon if approved by the subcommittee chair. If a member of the public seeks to be recognized, please wait. Additionally, I ask committee members and presenters to use common radio transmission protocols and state over when you conclude speaking to signal to others that you are complete. Members of the public were eligible to file written statement and request to make verbal presentations in accordance with the published Federal Register notice. Members of the subcommittee have been provided statements as received of 14 March, and we have several requests to make verbal presentations today. Members of the public will be called upon by name during that portion of the meeting and allotted for time for public statements. The Federal Register notice can be found at the Arlington National Cemetery website at www.arlingtoncemetery.mil, about, and then the Federal Advisory Committee tab. These proceedings are being digitally recorded and a summary in written form will be made available to the public on the ANC website. At this time, please give your attention to Mr. Mark Farley, the Remember and Explore Subcommittee Chairman. Over.
Subcommittee meeting is now called to order. I am pleased to act as the chairman for this esteemed group, and as this is our first meeting together as a subcommittee, I will ask the DFO to remind us of terms of reference and roles in support of the full advisory committee on Arlington National Cemetery following a roll call. At this time, I will ask the DFO to conduct the roll call. Ms. Renee?
Thank you, sir. For the record, the following members are in attendance. Mr. Mark Farley. Ms. Rose Duvall.
Present.
Mr. Nick Miller.
Present.
Mr. Robert Hess.
Present.
Secretary of Veteran Affairs nominee, Ms. Rosemary Freitas Williams.
Present.
I will ask if Ms. Ann Harrell is on the line. Mr. Chairman, based on the subcommittees in attendance today, we have a quorum. I will note that Ms. Ann Harrell and Mr. Gerald Torrance are not present for the meeting at this time. I will ask members of the public to please disable your cameras during this portion of the meeting if you're not speaking. As requested, the purpose of the Remember and Explore Subcommittee is to recommend methods to maintain the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier Monument, including the cracks in the large marble sarcophagus, the adjacent marble slabs, and the potential replacement of the marble stone of the sarcophagus already gifted to the U.S. Army. To accomplish independent assessments of requests related to commemorative works within Arlington National Cemetery, and to identify means to capture and convey the ANC's history and improve quality of the visitor experience for now and future generations to come. At this time, Chairman, the floor is yours for any opening comments to the subcommittee.
Yeah, again, thanks for everyone for attending today's meeting. Today we have two topics lined up. First, as a follow-up to our full committee meeting in November, the ANC team will provide responses to our request for information that we asked for concerning the chaplain's monument, and we will receive updates as to what those responses mean to the requested changes to the chaplain monument. Secondly, after that, we will review, hear public comments, and discuss the Section 106 process that Arlington National Cemetery will follow in order to implement the congressionally mandated naming commission's recommendation to remove the Confederate memorial at ANC. Upon completion of that update, there'll be time for subcommittee discussion, and then we will conclude upon the conclusion of those discussions. With that, Ms. Yates, that's all I have as an opening comment. I'll turn it back to you so we can get started. Over.
Thank you. I'll ask one more time. I ask members of the public in attendance to please disable your cameras so that we can save bandwidth for the committee members and those making presentations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our first meeting, and therefore there are no prior meeting minutes to review. Today, we do have some old business, as you stated, from the prior full committee meeting in November. The topic includes a commemorative work proposal for the subcommittee to review in accordance with the terms of reference. The full committee asked ANC staff to provide some research and be prepared to answer to the subcommittee the responses to 2 requests for information. The OAC strategic planner, Major Peppa Vasiliou, will provide the subcommittee with the requested information, and then the sponsor agency will have an opportunity to speak on their way ahead. I need to let the record show that Ms. Ann Harrell is present for the meeting. Major Peppa Vasiliou, the floor is yours. Over.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Major Petra Vasiliou. As Ms. Yates had already mentioned, I am a strategic planner for the Office of Army Cemeteries and the Commemorative Works Officer for Arlington National Cemetery. I'm here to help answer the request for information that came from the last advisory committee meeting. And I'll also be co-presenting, since this is a request on behalf of the National Conference on Ministry to the Armed Forces. So I'll be co-presenting with NIGNAF, as they're better known, and their speaker will be Rabbi Robinson, or Rear Admiral Retired Harold Robinson. And I'll stop here and ask if Rabbi Robinson wants to make any comments before we continue. Over.
No, I appreciate, I do. I appreciate the fact that the committee asked for additional information from the various G2s or the Chief of Naval Personnel, so that we have a much more complete look than we were able to acquire on our own through civilian sources. Diligent work by several historians and researchers, but obviously the G2s and the Chief of Naval Personnel were able to give us a much more complete record, and we thank you for your intervention in that. Over.
Well, and we thank you for all of your work at NIGNAF as well, sir. So we can go to the next slide and get right into it. Okay, so before we begin, I just wanted to make sure we went over a quick overview for the committee members and the members of the public, so we can orient you to Chaplain's Hill. So Chaplain's Hill is in Section 2 of the cemetery, and there are several prominent chaplains that are buried near these monuments. Here on the slide in the upper left-hand portion, we've listed some of those individuals, you know, including Major General William Arnold, who was the first chaplain to make the rank of general officer. And of course, he served as the chief of chaplains in World War II. And Major Charles Joseph Waters, who actually received the Medal of Honor posthumously from his actions in Vietnam as a chaplain. So pretty incredible, the group of people that we have in Arlington in general, to include our chaplains. So now, to orient you to the monuments themselves, the first monument we have here is a World War I Chaplain's Memorial that was emplaced in May of 1926. The second is a World War I and World War II Protestant Chaplain's Monument, and that was emplaced in 1981. The third is a Catholic Chaplain's Monument emplaced in 1989, and that covers the period of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And the fourth and most recent placement is the Jewish Chaplain's Monument, and that was placed in October of 2011. And I will pause here in case Rabbi Robinson wants to make any comments, or if any of the committee members have any questions for me before we continue. Over.
Good here. Over.
All right, so if there aren't any questions to that overview, can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so let's get into your request for information. So, as you recall, the committee did request on 8 November a few bits of information that we want to, provide the research of today. So the first was, where across the DoD are fallen and deceased chaplains already commemorated either as a whole or by name? And so to answer that question, we spoke to each of the services, did cast a wide net for research in case there's anything out there that people might not have been familiar with. And it turns out that the Department of Navy, including the Marines and the Air Force and the Space Force, have no such memorials. The only service that does is actually the Department of the Army. And that memorial is located at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, at their, chaplain school. And that memorial recognizes each Army chaplain that has died while on active duty by name. I'm going to pause here just in case there's any questions before I move to the second request for information. Okay, so the second piece was to provide a complete list of those chaplains who died while on active duty since 1948. So I have that broken out in the next few slides by service. I'm sorry, was there a question? Might have just been a hot mic. So in the next few slides, we'll go over that. I have it broken down by service, by faith group, and then in chronological order. And I'll just ask if Rabbi Robinson has any comments here before we continue to the next slide.
No, thank you very much. I, again, appreciate the efforts that on your part to fulfill the requests of the committee, which we appreciate.
Oh, thank you, sir. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here is the United States Army names broken down by faith group and, like I said, in chronological order. Let me orient you to the legend here in the lower right-hand portion. So the names that are in gray that you see here are names that are not currently reflected on any of the monuments on Chaplain's Hill, and the ones in green are. With that being said, the next slide, I have the Navy names, but I want to make sure that Rabbi Robinson doesn't have any comments on this slide before we continue.
No, we're wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide, please. And these are the Navy names, and this is also continued on the next slide.
And I do have a comment on this, and that is to say that we've got just for absolute accuracy, the Archbishop of the Military Archdiocese has confirmed Caris, number 15, a Navy name, should be on the Roman Catholic monument. So that would still not there, but it should be listed as Catholic. And we've washed these lists through all the endorsers. There are over 140 endorsers, and that was the only pop-up. And evidently the Archbishop was literally out of town until Monday, so we only just discovered that.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Actually, the reason why we do see so many Protestant names on this list is because there are so many denominations, over 140 denominations in this faith group. And so it's a lot harder to have your centralized repository of these lists like you would with, for example, the Catholic Church or, those of the Jewish faith, things of that nature. So I'm glad you brought that up, sir. Next slide, please. And this is the last of the Navy and all Catholic names. And of course, you can see they're in green, the ones that are already reflected on Chaplain's Hill. If there aren't any questions or comments, then I can move to the United States Air Force. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the last of the list here. I did want to make note at the top here So the Air Force Chief of Chaplain, Major General Randall Kitchens, when he answered our request for information, he did want to specify that the information he had received was basically that they didn't have any electronic records that they could search prior to 1972. So these are all the names that the Air Force could provide us. And so we have here again broken out by faith group. All of the Jewish names are already accounted for. And these are the remaining Catholic and Protestant names that were active duty deaths in the times that the Air Force could provide us, not reflected currently on Chaplain's Hill. I'm going to pause here in case there's any questions or comments from either Rabbi Robinson or any members of the committee. All right, nothing heard. Next slide, please. Okay, and then for these next two slides, I'm going to hand it over to you, Rabbi Robinson, so you can explain NIGMAP's request.
Thank you very much. First of all, pointing to the Protestant Chaplain Memorial, which was established back in the 1970s, and with a bronze plaque with over 130 names, and then a dedication plaque at the bottom saying this was established in the 1970s by us, under our former name, the General Board on Protestant Chaplaincy. I, Rabbi Robinson, is a former president of that, or board chairman of that organization once it's changed its name to the National Conference on the Ministry to the Armed Forces. So those are the two plaques on the front, and those are existing plaques. Currently, there's nothing on the back. It's empty. One of the issues with this monument is that it was made out of concrete, and since it's in concrete, it tends to disintegrate over time. And we're appreciative that the cemetery has spent time every 5 to 10 years repointing and repairing the concrete as it weeps lime, which also, by the way, doesn't do any great service to the bronze plaque. So there's a bit of a maintenance issue there, and we are proposing to replace it with an identically sized, down to the centimeter, identically sized granite plaque, monument or backing, which would match the other three monuments that you saw in the opening picture. Those are all granite. Our replacement for this would be Berry granite. We would place the two plaques that you see on the front of the new piece of granite, exactly as they are. On the back, we would place a new plaque stating that these are the Protestant chaplains that that perished while serving our country, and there would be room for 81 names. What you see depicted there is notional, as to it doesn't have a formal title. It doesn't have that opening statement. It doesn't give the time of service as the other one did, but we would add that, something to the effect of who perished in active service to our country from X date to X date. And then we would add those names, and exactly how much space that would take on the back to add 81 names would be up to the graphic designer and the people that mold the plaque. But I will tell you, it would be about, well, there are 140 on the first side, and we would want 80 on the back side. So that gives you some sense of proportion. That's all I have, unless there's some additional questions. Then ready to go to the next slide, please. So this is the Catholic plaque. It's more up to date, but not entirely up to date. It's missing one Vietnam era. That's Chaplain Karras that I mentioned, who was on number 15 on the Army page. And it's missing 31 additional chaplain names. And we would add a new plaque approximately 30 by 12 with the 30 names. You can barely see it, but it has a little bit, it does have designation by the era of service or the era of service, depending upon where in the country you're from. So, so that would be on the front of the plaque, and that would be the only changes we are advocating, and our goal is to bring Chaplain's Hill monuments up to date and declare the project complete, so that despite the authorization in the NDAA, this would be NDEX completed project on our part. Over.
Okay, Mr. Davis, I believe that is the last slide, correct? Yes. So at this point in time, we'll hand over, the floor to the committee to ask any questions and discussion, and I will turn my camera off.
Can I make one additional comment? And that is that to date, and one of the reasons we want to complete Chaplain's Hill now is that to date, we have not lost any chaplains on active duty that don't fit into the categories delineated by those monuments. And we have no way to predict the future. We're chaplains, not prophets. But right now, there's always a risk that we're going to have a loss in the chaplain corps beyond the parameters, some faith not otherwise represented. So we would like to close the project, but make it complete first. Out here.
Mr. Chairman, the floor is now yours and the committee's for discussion. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. Admiral Robinson, thank you also. That was a good update and answered our question. Our questions, I guess, is the right way to say it, that we had back in November. I'd like to make a couple comments myself, and then I'll acknowledge the other subcommittee members whose hands are going up now. First, I think for Renee and Matt, now that the Admiral has told us about Chaplain Karras, I think we need to update our slides to reflect the new number of 80 and 32 by my math, based on Chaplain Karras being a Catholic, Vice a Protestant. That keeps us straight as we continue to do our work. And then my second point would be is to the Admiral and to my subcommittee members for thought and discussion. If we use the past as any prediction of the future, then we know additional chaplains are going to pass away on active duty, be it from war or DNBI or whatever the case may be, accident, etc. So I'm cautious of using the word complete because we know we're going to lose chaplains in service to our country on active duty. This will never be complete. So I'll use that as my kickoff discussion, and I'll let the subcommittee members and then we'll re-engage. I'll re-engage Admiral Robinson in just a moment after some of the subcommittee members speak. If I believe I read it right, I think I saw Miss Rose Duvall's hand up next, so I will defer to her right now. Over.
I looked at this and I see primarily just the replacement of the stone for stone, concrete, whatever. And I see no reason why we should, stop that or have anything against that. The other one is, as far as the names, if they're not making any changes to the actual footprint, the real estate, and it's all handled within the stone. You're right. We always hope there'll be no more names added. However, names can be. I don't see it in the immediate future since we're not in an active combat situation. But you never know. I mean, we're trying to keep this long term. So I personally, from looking and listening, I see no reason to object to anything on this, but that's just my 2 cents.
Okay, thanks, Rose. Noted. I think Nick, your hand's up next. Over.
Yeah, Admiral, I appreciate you really pushing this forward. And I thank you for the update. I had just 2 questions really around, the gap between 1947 and 1972, and I know we went to the Air Force Personnel Center. Are there other avenues to really kind of close that out? Because I think I echo your focus to bring this up to present day, and I worry we're not going to, or have concerns we're not going to capture everybody. And so, didn't know if there's other options there to kind of make sure we're complete.
No, and that's a good question, Mr. Miller, and I appreciate you bringing it up. The research is definitely difficult, and it definitely took a whole team, of researchers. We had reached out to historians at the museum there at Fort Jackson, at the Army, Chaplain Corps Museum, and, the chief of chaplain's offices, and they had reached out within the building, to the personnel folks, to give us the best information they could. And as well, NINMAF, I really want to point out, they did a great job with research, and that they identified 2 names that weren't currently reflected on the Army Memorial that are now in front of the Commandant there to be added to the Army Memorial. So I thank NINMAF for that research. So as we all know, I think one of the problems is a compo issue, right? Is the Army, especially being active duty, I've found, at least in my experience, we're very biased towards active duty. And sometimes when you have like Reserve or National Guard that gets called, to active duty in parishes, then where do you go for that record? Is that going to be something that, the active component has access to, or are they counting on the states to do so? So it's definitely the best research that we could do in the time that we had. I will definitely brainstorm to see if there's a better, if there's other ways that we might be able to look to make sure that, we've turned over every stone. But at this point, we've really made a concerted effort with, what we have available, which is an imperfect record system, right? Within the government, of course. I don't know if that fully answers your question, Mr. Miller. Over.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate the imperfect record system. I acknowledge that is that's definitely a challenge. Yeah, I think I love the initiative, and I am kind of aligned with Mr. Farley and Ms. Duvall around kind of moving forward. I would ask we try to, World War II Memorial, Korean War Memorial, are there other areas where they might have this data that we could go reach out to and quickly get that done? So, yep.
So if I don't see any other hands raised, so So going backwards through the.
Admiral Robinson, just 1 second. We had Miss Freitas
I'm
Williams asked. That's okay. Miss Freitas Williams, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. And Miss Williams is fine, or Rosemary. I know the maiden name can catch people up. First, I wanted to let the good rabbi and his cohort know that I've always been a big fan of Nick Maff when I was DASD for Military, Family, and Community Policy. It became even more abundantly obvious to me that there's a segment of our population who only go to the chaplaincy and in their need. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful. I wanted to say also that stone for stone, that sounds reasonable and certainly doable. Next, I wanted to just point out, as the representative for VA, the agency where I spent a number of years around public affairs and communications, and a lot of work with the National Cemetery Administration, 160 plus denominations, because there are the denominations, if you will. And in today's climate, in the climate and environment going forward, any monument to chaplaincy, I would submit a consideration for all the many denominations that are represented in the force that the chaplaincy serves, if you will. So I'll leave that there. I would request consideration instead of adding all the names, because I think we can take the word completed off the table. Chaplains will always serve in combat and in time of war and active duty, and they will go to their greater reward like the rest of us, and we want to honor them. So completed, I think, is a term of art and rather temporary. And I hear that among others as well. So I would request consider language instead of the additional names, such as, and others who served in the chaplaincy who made the ultimate sacrifice. And I'll tell you why, because one, this will never really fully end, and that's a logistical issue, but also an issue that I think that everyone needs to consider, in that I believe, and correct me where I go wrong, Renee, is this not the only monument at Arlington that actually, group monument that names all names? Accurate?
That is a true statement. The only other markers like this are what are considered group markers that have commingled remains below them. The one exception is the Columbia marker up in it's got all the names of the astronauts versus those that were not recovered. Over.
Roger. And I believe that Columbia is commingled in intent, while the remains were not recovered. I understand.
That's correct. The act of Congress. It was an act of Congress that put the marker here. Over.
Thank you, Renee. So, Rabbi and my esteemed subcommittee members, I would just like to request consideration of language that honors all the chaplaincy, and in an effort to ensure that the logistics of upkeeping the monument is within reason, period. And then my final question, I have a final question for Rabbi, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you are a gracious and a gracious man, and I know you'll understand the intent is positive. I wanted to ask, if you were a member of the advisory committee and you were asked by another cohort, why can't we have a group memorial with all our names? Because the chaplaincy has it. How would you respond? And if it's an unfair question, please feel free to pass it by. Over.
Hey, Renee, let me interject here real quick. Rosemary, it's a great comment, and I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for just a moment. And Bob, I saw your hand up, but I'm gonna give the Admiral a chance to answer that question while it's fresh in his mind, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, stand by. Admiral, go ahead, please, sir. Over.
Thank you very much. And with a bit of permission, I would like to answer a couple of other questions before they go stale, especially as they're leading us down dead-end paths, because I have information that perhaps the committee doesn't yet have. As to other cohorts, that interacts with the term complete. So the reason I use the term is not so much that the monuments are complete, that's in God's hands, but that our work as the National Conference on the Ministry to the Armed Forces is complete, and that we would have no intent to add additional names to the existing monuments once these names are there. And that would be the conclusion of our effort. Now, why does that relate to the question of other cohorts? Well, because this got started at an earlier time in the history of Arlington National Cemetery when it was allowed. By calling an end to it now, in terms of our work at NCMAF, then that question becomes moot. Because there will be no ongoing names being added anyplace else. It will be a sui generis example of something that happened in the 1970s, done, end. So that's how I would respond to other cohorts. I would also suggest that while every cohort feels that it is a unique enterprise, this chaplain corps uniquely represents the diversity within the American body politic. There is no other country on the face of the earth that has a chaplain corps such as ours, which, by the way, there are more than 140 religious denominations or groups like denominations across the United States, but only 140 of them, I think it's actually 141, so don't hold me to that number, but are actually certified to appoint chaplains to the armed forces, so that every chaplain in the armed forces has to have been certified by one of those 141 denominations. There may be 19, there may be 200 other denominations, but they've never been certified and they have never appointed chaplains. And as long as I'm on a roll here, one of the other ways that we sought to validate the names, as I mentioned, is since every chaplain must be certified, the term of art is endorsed by one of the 140 endorsing agents, of which I used to be one, then we have gone to the 140 on several occasions. We've gone to the 141 or so endorsing agents and said, here's the list we have. Has the Jewish Welfare Board lost a rabbi that we don't know about? Has the military archdiocese lost a priest that we don't know about? I'll go through 141, but you don't want me to do that. By the way, on this call is Bishop Derek Jones of the Anglican Communion in the United States, and also a former chair of the National Conference of Ministry of the Armed Forces. And Bishop Jones has been a key interlocutor between NCMAF since my retirement and those denominations, so that we have gone to wash the list as completely as I could. Is there a possibility that somebody's been missed? Yeah, but it's not on our watch. It's on the denominations at this point. And we've also gone to the Retired Chaplains Association. That's not its formal name, but there is such a name. So anybody know anybody we missed? So is it possible? Yeah, but I don't think that we can take moral responsibility. I hate to quote former Secretary Rumsfeld, but we know the knowable. That's a paraphrase. We can't know the unknown unknowns. So those are the pushbacks I have on the term completed. We would undertake no further completion. We be groping or searching or hoping for a all Chaplain Corps monument somewhere, somehow, that will take into account all future losses and acknowledge all past losses in general terms, but will take into account all future losses, because there's nothing to say that those future losses won't be a Sikh or a Hindu or some other to date unrepresented, a Buddhist, a Jain, some other unrepresented group. So that's why we want to, I'll use the term close out. And I would say that if, in terms of adding the names on Chaplain's Hill, since so many names are there, and you take, for example, Chaplain Karras, who died in 1965, I think it was, and his nephew goes up to Chaplain's Hill and says, the only one not here, and the Catholics, that's my uncle, who died in Vietnam. So, I mean, why do that when we have the ability to bring it up to the known point of filling in the additional names? So those are my responses to the questions as received so far. Sorry, I'm a rabbi. I tend to preach sermons, and they're not usually short.
All right, hey, Admiral, thank you again very much. Hey, I thought I saw two hands go up. I think Bishop Jones, you have a hand up over.
Yes, sir. Just want to simply add to Admiral Robinson, Ms. Rosemary, you also said about nons. He mentioned denominations. We also went to the umbrella groups and also former umbrella groups who were members of NCMAF to ask that same question. Is there anybody we're missing? So we feel very confident that we have the names. Is it possible? Yes, it's always possible. But given the level of interest that this has taken and the amount of cross communication that has taken place, we feel very confident that we have a complete list. And I do echo Admiral Robinson. We're seeking to find that that place where we can put in all chaplains, to where we can kind of end the in perpetuity of the names, and completing those to date would help us. And I appreciate Ms. Yates recommending that to us. We've moved down that path. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. And if I may, Mark, forgive the interruption, just to clarify my point, and thank you for that. Very, very important. And I appreciate the due diligence you went through, the team went through to do that, to do the scrape. My point actually was that I feel like there's a disservice to the chaplaincy in not, instead of the names, listing all the different denominations that were served or potentially served. This to me is a remarkable story. And one other, Mark, one more question, and Renee, this might be for you. If I understand it, Rabbi, you're also looking for a waiver on the 25-year wait rule on names. Is that accurate? Over.
That issue, I believe, was
Yeah, Admiral Robinson, if you would let me, I can answer that, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Williams, that was what some of the congressional language basically called on, that the Secretary of the Army has the authority to approve that waiver. So it's a known fact that some of these names would require a waiver. And so as the packet moves forward, that's just acknowledged that the waiver is inclusive in the package. Over.
Thank you for that, Roger, and thank you. So we cannot separate out the waiver. Accurate? Over.
Ma'am, this subcommittee can make whatever recommendations they feel appropriate to the full committee, and the full committee again can make any recommendations they feel appropriate to the Secretary of the Army. You're an independent body, and you can make those recommendations as appropriate. Over.
Roger, thank you.
I will point out that the NDAA 2023 specified the ability of the secretary to approve the list of names without regard to the 25 years. That was specifically without regard to the 25 years. So that was Congress's, the sense of the House and the Senate, and signed by the president, and it's in black letter law.
Evan Robinson, yeah, thanks, and acknowledge. So, Bob Hess, over.
Hey, thanks, Mark. No, I think Evan Robinson answered my questions. The biggest thing was when he used the term "we're closing out," and that now that we know that we're not going to add any more names to the monument, then I'm fine.
Yeah. So, okay, thanks. Any other subcommittee members have any comments? Over.
Yeah, Mark, this is Ann.
Yeah,
My
yeah,
only
go ahead,
comment
please.
is I feel the same way. My only concern was we were going to do this into infinity. And if this is the end, then I'm okay.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Ann. And that was going to be my point. And so I'll make a couple comments. And again, as our work goes, we always get more information, which drives more questions, right? So what I've learned in 45 years of federal service is we never say never, right? And so we're all speaking about what we know today. When we say we, that means we as a group acknowledge and we would understand each other to say, okay, we're never going to ask to add more names. But when we're long gone and the next group comes in 20 years from now, excuse me, and we have another 20 chaplains die, the next group's going to come in and say, okay, I'm going to add my names now. And that's fair. I got it. And it's what we're here to do. Remember and explore and pay tribute to those who die in service to our country. So, I don't, like I suggested, I don't care for this never, no more. But I think there's a couple things that I think we ought to look at that we discussed in the big committee, and now it's been hit on here a couple times, right? There are a whole lot more denominations in the future that we don't acknowledge on Chaplain's Hill. And so, yes, another monument to honor all chaplains, past, present, and future, needs to be the next topic of discussion as far as that goes. And so, you know, there's a suggestion that I would propose to Renee to take back to there for discussion. Maybe there's another place that we could have a memorial to chaplains at or near Arlington that would then encompass everything in the future. And I'll defer to Miss Yates if she could provide some recommendations. The other thing, the question that I now have, and because I'm not sure we ever asked this question previously, how many of the names on the chaplain monuments are buried in Arlington? And how many of the new 112 names are buried in Arlington? I would like to know that information if we could get it, before I would render my final opinion. But I do kind of agree the stone could be replaced because we want to get it to granite. I got it, because that saves resources and it increases the longevity of the monument as it is today. And then the discussion of names adding today to finish off what we know could be answered by a future monument somewhere else that would honor anybody in the future. So I'm not gonna render an opinion on that right now, because I think I want a little bit more information. So Renee, would you like to walk us down some alternatives of a future monument for chaplains there near Arlington? Over.
I'd like to, this is Rosemary Williams. I'd like to comment before we go down that road, if that's okay, Mark.
Go ahead, Rosemary. Sorry.
Thank you. And thank you, my new good friend, Mark. I so appreciate your leadership in this difficult conversation. I just want to submit that as a long-suffering communicator, I believe respectfully that another monument to the chaplaincy will not be defensible. It won't be defensible for the families and loved ones of the chaplains who are not named, and it would not be defensible in the court of public opinion. Further, it would be doing a great disservice to Rabbi Robinson and Nick Maff on the great efforts that have been made at this particular monument, because you have now eliminated the people who will go to the monument to the loved ones of those listed. Again, it's not, in my professional opinion on the communication side, it is, we will find it not to be defensible. Unfortunately, we're at a pivot point now, in my humble opinion. Over. Thank you.
Okay, Rosemary, thank you. Chaplain Robinson, I see you raising your hand.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm technologically not as adroit to raise it online.
That's
So
okay, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's what comes from being somewhat older. So in terms of what will happen 20 years from now, at my age, I have no expectation that I will be part of that conversation. However, Nick Maff is prepared to sign a memorandum of understanding, since Nick Maff is the sponsor of those monuments on Chaplain's Hill, to sign, and then that's by the NDAA stipulation, the NDAA 2022. We're prepared to sign a memorandum of understanding stating that we're done with our work on Chaplain's Hill, with the expectation that there be some generic monument on or near Arlington where future losses, where chaplain corps losses generically would be acknowledged. So as to the public understanding of this, if for a moment we believe that the Congress of the United States somehow represents the national will, the fact that it has twice passed into the NDAA authorization for the addition of these names now, and the elimination of the 25-year waiting period does, in my mind, and I'm not on the committee, and probably it's a good thing, but it does in my mind, and I don't envy the work the committee does on so many difficult subjects, but in my mind that provides a sense of the national will now to finish adding these names. As to the fact that there is no way on Chaplain's Hill to commemorate a Muslim, a Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, Hindu, other faiths. That's a serious issue in a chaplain corps where we serve everyone. But by the way, in terms of listing the denominations, chaplains do come as representatives of their faith groups and their denominations, but they don't serve that way. They serve everyone, and they don't do religious rites outside of their faith group, but they commit to serving all. And an airman coming for guidance from a chaplain is not going to say, or there's no mechanism for that airman, he or she, to say, oh no, I want an American Baptist. I'm an American Baptist. We serve everybody. So that we would push back from the sense that we want to list all the faith groups currently or previously represented. But the people served in good faith, and we would want them represented. Out here.
Yes, sir. So acknowledge all, and it may come to that memorandum of understanding once the decisions rendered by the Secretary of the Army, and we close this request out. Renee, would you like to make any comments over?
Roger, I just want to, so everyone is very clear that the title that authorizes, Title 38 that authorizes even this whole discussion about a commemorative work at Arlington National Cemetery specifically states that no monument can be placed in an area which burial could occur. So present day today, that's a very limited, those are very limited locations throughout the cemetery. And as this committee is very well aware, many of our requests for monuments have been reduced to smaller, what we like to call tree plaques, but they're actually a monument that's able to be moved or relocated as roadways and the cemetery burial space ebbs and flows and grows as we continue to ensure Arlington's space is utilized for burial and burial alone. There is, as anyone who's ever approached Arlington National Cemetery, Memorial Avenue, which is part of the National Capitol Viewshed, from Arlington House across the Memorial Bridge to the Lincoln Memorial and beyond on the National Mall. I've asked Mr. Davis, he's pulling up some of the laws for the members of the committee, just to remind you of what was published in the laws, and this is the 2022 law that allowed, no, 23, excuse me, I'm being corrected, but it was the NDAA 2022 that authorizes NCMAF to carry out these stipulations with, in particular, related to the monuments on Chaplain's Hill. Back to my discussion of the National Memorial Avenue and the National Mall. There are already monuments out on Memorial Ave. At the time they were placed, Memorial Avenue belonged to the National Park Service and was part of the greater extension of the mall. That property has now belongs to Arlington National Cemetery, at least the property basically to the north. Let's get my directions, northwest of the metro stop. So there are several monuments out there on the mall that are two larger groups without any names. So if you were to ask me on a place where would a larger monument to all chaplains of all faiths potentially be appropriate, it would be there. And obviously that's an entryway into Arlington National Cemetery and would be viewed and seen by many individuals. I know I took for the record, Mr. Chairman, that we can run all the names against the burial lists at Arlington National Cemetery. They're all digital now, so we will run a scrub of the names of the fallen chaplains and provide you with the names of those that are on the monument or proposed to be on the monument versus who's actually buried at the cemetery. There are a few that I know of that are actually not even buried on Chaplain's Hill because they died in the line, in combat, and so they're buried at other burial locations at the cemetery. But we'll run that scrub and be able to provide that to you at the next subcommittee meeting. Did I answer your question, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman?
Renee, yes, ma'am, you're spot on, and I appreciate that. So to kind of wrap this up, what I'm going to ask is I'll ask the subcommittee's members to kind of give me a yay or a nay on a recommendation to the full committee, which is meeting next week. And I'll have to provide a report with Renee on our subcommittee discussions today. So I will sum it up, and then you correct me as to what your thoughts and your vote would be, loose term vote. What I think I'm hearing is, with all that we know about the previous NDAA and the authorizations that were granted for waivers, et cetera, what I think I heard is we're not comfortable that we have them all because of the Air Force stipulation of no records before 72 or 74, whatever year it was. But I heard no objections to adding the names, the 112 names out that were provided by the departments in our request for information. And then it would end with no additional names added to the current monuments at Chaplain's Hill, and that any future monument or commemorative marker to honor chaplains who die in service to the nation would be done through a new commemorative work or marker somewhere at, near, or close to Arlington National Cemetery. So if you would, one by one, tell me if I've summed it up and you concur with that recommendation. Over.
I'm good with that, Mark. That's Ann.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. As noted, good. I'll call, that way we can get it through it. Bob, you good?
Yeah, I'm good with the Mark.
Thank you. Rosemary, ma'am?
Mark, I'll vote in favor of that. I would also add that I'd recommend a statement from Nick Maff that this completes the requirement. Over.
Acknowledged, and I'll roger that also. Thank you. Who did I miss?
Hey, Mark, it's Nick.
Yeah, Nick, go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm completely aligned. I worry, like Rosemary, that the word complete will fall down if we find or identify folks in that period between 47 and 72. And so
Yep.
I think that's a risk worth considering and figuring out whether or not we have additional resources to bring to bear. But otherwise, I'm aligned with what you said and supportive.
Okay, Rose Duvall, ma'am.
I'm good with what you're going with, Mark.
I'm sorry, Rose, you were a little broken.
I'm good with what you're going with.
Okay, all right, thank you, Miss Rose. Renee, I see your hand up. Hold on, Admiral, just 1 second, please. Renee?
Just wanted to comment. I know you're mentioning regarding the statement from Nick Maff. We could have, I could offer you could amend the language related to some words to the effect of a memorandum of agreement or understanding would be established before the names were, added or something to that effect, words to that effect that kind of make this an agreement in writing. Over.
Renee,
Yeah,
if I-
I will honor Admiral's words that he made, that he was willing to do that. And I will let them make that determination on how that's stated, but I would request back to the Admiral that he has heard what the subcommittee believes, and if he could work that for us, that would be deeply appreciated as our recommendation to the full committee. Over. Yeah, Admiral, I see you. Go ahead, please, sir.
So thank you. First of all, thanks all the members of the subcommittee. Thanks to Mrs. Yates and to Major Papasili, you on all the hard work getting us to this point, and to Matthew getting us to this point. Missing, Mark, from your reprise of the that was just voted on was you didn't explicitly mention the substitution of granite for concrete, although I do recall that in the conversation, everyone to an individual had stipulated that there was no objection to that. So I just want to get that back on the record.
No, sir. Yes, sir. I thought I said the stone, and that's what I meant by the stone. Yeah, you could get the full replacement granite, put the plaques you have now, just put them on the new one. No debate from the subcommittee on that, from what I heard. So that's part of the recommendation to the full committee.
Let me just check one other source of input here for me, and that is, once again, we have Bishop Jones has been uncharacteristically silent.
I saw his hand go up, Admiral. Go ahead, Bishop Jones. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I was actually going to say Admiral Robinson keeps good company. Miss Yates is aware, and I appreciate that she's leaving that for us. Nick Math established a permanent committee, a permanent Arlington committee, in light of the NDAAs. And I am the chair of that committee, and so it is my signature that will go on that document of agreement. And so when the Admiral says that can be done, I can assure you that he is speaking not with forked tongue. He is speaking on my behalf, and I will be able to sign that letter as the chair of the permanent committee.
So let it be done, sir.
You bet.
Thank you, sir. You read between my lines, sir. I appreciate your comment.
I will tell you, I am walking away from this meeting thrilled that there is an interest in finding a permanent place for a longer lasting, non in perpetuity named monument for all chaplains, because that's an important part of this. And I greatly appreciate the committee members that recommended that, and Ms. Yates on that.
And part of, just to add one closing comment, one of the reasons we are happy or satisfied to sign such a memorandum and to commit to not adding additional names is that we heard in the November meeting the angst that the idea of having a monument with always new names, having this come up every so often. We heard the angst that created for a few of the members of the subcommittee, and we were in response to that and sensitive to that. I will say that, I love data integrity, but if the Air Force, if all we're missing is a few years of the Air Force and none of the endorsers from that era can come up with any name. And we've had two data, one of our historians is Greg Tardo, professor of history, who has done a lot of research on this. At some point, you have to take the risk and move forward. That's just me, and I clearly don't get a vote. We could have saved a lot of time if I did.
All right. Thank you, Admiral. Okay, I'm going to leave the mic. I'm going to mute my mic, and I'll give you about 10 seconds for any final comments from any subcommittee members. If not, Ms. Yates, I turn it back over to you for our second topic. Over.
Thank you.
God bless you all. God bless the United States of America, and God bless all who serve her in uniform.
And Papa Vasilio, you are a marvelous woman. Thank you for your yeoman's work.
All right, thanks. Hey,
If I ever have to go back to war, I want you with me.
hey,
Thank
Renee,
you, Jim.
I'll let
Yes, sir.
you make the call if we want to take a 5-minute break or whatever you
gonna-
suggest. I'm in. Okay.
I'm going to offer to the committee members that we take a 5-minute pause if anyone needs to use the restroom. We will. I'm gonna call it a couple extra minutes. Right now, I see 13:12. I'll ask everyone to be back at the computer and ready to begin, and I will begin at 13:20. I will at this time also ask those members of the public, if you are not speaking or being addressed, to please disable your cameras. And Ms. Stevens, if you need some assistance with that, my team can help you guide you on where that is. But if I could ask Miss Mary Stevens to turn your camera off, ma'am. Thank you.
On a break for 20 minutes.
Can you put this on my foot?
Yeah. Let me go to the bathroom first. I'll wash my hands.
Hey, somebody has a hot mic and we're not on break for 20 minutes. We're on break for about 7 more minutes. Please be back at 20 after the hour, wherever you may be.
If you've dialed in by phone, please mute your mics. Otherwise, they're going to have to be removed from the meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as the DFO, I want to confirm that all the members are back and present. So I'll do a mini roll call. With your permission, sir.
Go ahead, Miss Renee. Thank you.
Ms. Harrell? Ms. Harrell, are you present? Ms. Duvall?
Present.
Mr. Miller,
Present.
Mr. Hess,
Present.
Ms. Williams, Ms. Williams, Ms. Harrell. So we'll pause for a moment, waiting for 2 members to rejoin.
Yes, ma'am. Renee, I just sent them a message in the chat. Tell them to let us know when they're back up.
Tracking, sir. While we're waiting, I'm going to take a moment and remind everyone from the public to please keep your mics muted and your camera off. And we do have members of the public that will be invited to speak. Those that have requested in accordance with the Federal Register notice, and you will be called on by name shortly. The next time that number comes up again, please kick them off.
Ms. Harrell, are you back up?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Ms. Williams, over.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'll ask us to go ahead and proceed.
Yeah, go ahead, and hopefully she'll see the chat and she'll let us know when she's back up. Please continue.
Thank you. So at this time, our next presentation will be from the Arlington National Cemetery Chief Engineers, Colonel Tom Austin. Colonel Austin will provide the subcommittee information on the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 process that ANC intends to follow in order to implement the congressionally mandated naming commission recommendation to remove the Confederate memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. Colonel Austin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Yates. Good afternoon. My name is Colonel Tom Austin. I am the Director of Engineering for Arlington National Cemetery. I will briefly address the administrative process we are taking in regards to the Naming Commission's recommendations for the Confederate Memorial here at ANC. We are working in close coordination with the Virginia State Historic Preservation Office, the Virginia SHPO. ANC will complete all administrative actions required by law as laid out in the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. Consultation is required anytime there is a determination of an undertaking that has the potential for an adverse effect on a historic property. In this case, the removal of the Confederate memorial from the grounds of ANC. ANC is in the initial phases of the consultation process and is collaborating with the Virginia SHPO prior to beginning the public phase of consultation. Once the consultation plan is coordinated with interagency organizations, The public will be notified via Federal Register and the media of an opportunity to provide input and comment on mitigation actions and the ultimate permanent location for the memorial. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any process questions from a member of the committee. Over.
And then just for the committee members, a reminder, the DoD Naming Commission slide is up, and you see where you can go for more information on what the recommendation was. And then if we go to the next slide, topic of discussion obviously is the Confederate Memorial. So at this time, do any of the naming committee, do any of the committee members, subcommittee members have questions for Colonel Austin? Over.
Rosemary Williams, I do not. Over.
Yes, Renee. This is Ann. Is Colonel Austin aware of the communications that we have all been receiving from interested parties?
I can answer that. I have my cultural resources manager here as well, Ms. Smith. She is, as well as our consultants, we are keeping a track of a wide number of consulting parties or people have requested to be consulting parties. As far as your specific communications, I do not aware, but we have been in communication with multiple parties who expressed interest to be a consulting party. Over.
Okay.
To answer your question directly, Ms. Harrell, yes, those documents will all be added into the body of documents that are considered and reviewed as part of the public consultation process. They will be formally, the most recent set will be formally provided following the subcommittee meeting. Over.
Okay, thank you.
So Renee, so I don't hear anything from any other subcommittee members. I don't have any additional questions, based on our full committee meeting in November and the follow-up. But I think it would be good for you, before we entertain public comment here in a few minutes. I know that's where we're headed. But to level the field to all of those interested parties that are going to speak to us here in a few minutes, to understand that exactly what all of the subcommittee members have received, you have received at Arlington, etc., just so they know that we have it, where we have read it, we've been informed. But I think at the conclusion of this topic discussion, we have a process that we have to follow, and that is what we're going to do. And then at the end of that process was where the deliberation will occur. Over.
Roger, Mr. Chairman. So for first and foremost, for everyone on the group and to the committee members specifically, need to be aware that there are two actions of litigation currently underway, two suits that have been filed DC Superior Court for against the removal of the memorial against the Army. And so those and one of those actions, the most recent of those two, was provided to all of the members. I will remind the members that besides the two lawsuits that have been received, we also have numerous letters, and Mr. Davis is providing me some specific details, but approximately 98 pages or so of public comments that we've received at this time. And we've received some of the members, and all of you will have be provided the document that some were mailed. I believe a body of text that was mailed to some of the members. And we've have over 300 pages of comments that were received during the full committee meeting. So that's just a kind of a summary of the body. I believe it's just, we haven't formally started the consultation period yet. And I will remind everyone of that there will be public meetings that will be held by Arlington National Cemetery specific to the mitigation and the ultimate permanent location of the memorial. I want to also inform everyone that as a reminder, what we're talking about is removal of the bronze elements. And so the slide in front of you The photo on the left is a blow up of the monument itself. And so everything granite at the base will stay, and the bronze elements are what will be removed. And those will be packaged and stored as we go through the process. But nothing occurs, no action occurs until after we complete the Section 106 process, which includes public consultation. Yes, Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Matthew. I will say, I loved that that you provided a tour for the committee when we last met, and the historian explanation. It was extraordinary, and I'm appreciative. I happen to be of the camp that would love for it to stay as a reminder of the history of our nation, but also see the merit in dismantling it. My question is about the extraordinary craftsmanship, the artwork by the sculptor. Is that, I couldn't get that in the last slide, I'm sorry. Is it preserved in some way, or does it go in the Army archives? What is its fate? And I'm talking specifically about the panels. Over.
So that the ultimate permanent location will be part of what is discussed and agreed upon through the Section 106 process. So that is to be determined as we go through and follow the National Historic Preservation Act and the consultation with both interagencies and the public as we decide those elements. Where will the ultimate permanent location be? So to answer your specific question, that it likely can't be answered for many months.
Roger, and thank you. And who presents the options, or are those things that those are the things that are researched? Over.
Those are the things we consult upon, and then ultimately the Department of Defense will make that final decision on where the monument goes following its removal from Arlington.
Thank you, Renee. Crystal clear. Over.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a great question, Rosemary. Thanks. And not only where it goes, but the condition that it goes in, I think, is the second point that has to be answered. So I think what I hear, Renee, is we have no more questions for Colonel Austin. So do we want to move to the next step in this process, which is comment? Over.
Yes, and I will ask Mr. Davis to leave the slide up that's currently up for us as we move forward. All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this time we will open the floor for approximately 60 minutes thereabouts to those members of the public who requested to present to the subcommittee in accordance with the published Federal Register notice. I will call on the names in the order for which the requests were received. Before we begin, I will ask the public to be respectful of their time and the manner of presentation, noting that any time during the discussion, if anything becomes disruptive or inappropriate or beyond the time limit, the speaker will be muted and potentially removed from the call. We ask that each member of the public, when you're called upon by name, to introduce yourself. You will have 2.5 minutes to speak. That's in order to allow everyone that is requested to speak appropriate amount of time. And we will provide the speakers a 30-second warning in the Teams chat feature of the call to give you a warning when you're reaching that after 2 minutes has expired. I want to apologize personally in advance for any mispronunciation of any of your names. And so at this time, we're going to begin with Mr. or Mrs. Boykin. Volpe Boykin, if you're present.
Yes, ma'am. It's Volpe Boykin. I'm from Virginia, and the first name is spelled V like Virginia, O-L, P like as in Paul, E. Good afternoon, and thank you all for your service. The monument in question is not to any government. It is a grave marker, which makes it different from anything else in the renaming commission's dictates as to what they're supposed to do. It is beneath the United States government or any civilized society to remove grave markers or disturb and desecrate any grave of any person for any reason. No one has any more right to hate the soldiers that occupied their country and killed tens of thousands of their citizens than the French. I have visited the German military cemetery in Le Cambrai, France, which contains the graves of over 22,000 German soldiers. It contains a very large statue as one of those grave markers, and the cemetery is as well maintained as the American cemetery, which is a few miles away. But the French, respecting that civilized societies do not desecrate graves or grave markers, allows this cemetery and its large memorial statue grave marker to remain and be maintained. Are we less civilized than the French or those of other countries that do not disturb their enemies' graves? I would like you all to think about this. Should RIP, rest in peace, be replaced with RIJ, rest in judgment? When that happens, we're all in trouble because the dead are unable to defend themselves or their place of rest while being judged by the living. I know there are people that wish vengeance on those that have been dead for 150 years, but are we so woke that we stoop to desecrating graves and destroying grave markers at national soldiers' cemeteries? That statue cannot be removed without disturbing and desecrating graves. It is one of the most disgusting things that will happen in American history. I hope we have not stooped that low and that at least the litigation will be successful. This is just, it's an international embarrassment that my friends and family in Italy and Poland and other places I travel in Europe, they can't even fathom doing this to their enemies' graves, the Germans. Thank you.
I will ask the public to be reminded that unless you're speaking, to please keep your camera off. Our next speaker will be Stuart Schimler.
Hello, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. You'll notice that I do not have a Southern accent. I'm actually a Northerner. I don't have any ancestors who fought in the Civil War for the North or for the South, but I am an American history buff, and this monument means as much to me as really as much as any other American monument to American veterans. And I feel that what's been happening, especially recently, is that our history has been caught up in political battles. And at some point, I think all of us need to say that our history is off limits. And we are one united nation. We have many people from a variety of backgrounds and many newcomers to the country, including my grandparents who came here in the early 1900s, who have adopted many of the cultural changes of America and have accepted all of its history. This monument means a lot to many of us who love the history of our country and all of our history. I also find it a little strange that we're even having this discussion today because, quite frankly, the Naming Commission went beyond its remit. The removal of this monument is illegal. It is against the law. The law that Congress outlined in Section 370 of the National Defense Authorization Act was only to go after assets that were named after individuals who voluntarily served in the Confederate Army and any assets that honor the Confederate States of America. This asset does neither. The monument in question, designed by Moses Ezekiel, was called the New South. Why are we even having this discussion today? Where does it end? The answer, it doesn't end. If you look at all of the assets and other statues in the United States portfolio, you will see that many of these statues are made by people who had views and did things that many of us today would find revolting. Yet at the same time, we still have those statues and they're maintained by our government. And we're going to be having this conversation every day for the rest of our lives and our children's lives and so on and so forth. If we don't
Our next speaker will be Mr. Philip Lee.
I'm an American, and I agree this is an illegal step taken because this is desecration of the graves. The boys in blue and the boys in gray were both Americans, and both merit a memorial to their reconciliation. According to Yale historian David Blight, by 1874, just 9 years after Appomattox, a genuine reconciliation based upon mutual experience was already taking hold among the soldiers. Notwithstanding that their homeland had been devastated by civil war, postbellum Confederates and their descendants more readily volunteered to fight under the old flag than did citizens from other parts of the country. Presently, 44% of our volunteer army is from the South, notwithstanding that only 36% of the population is. This is of the 18 to 24 age group. In a 1955 Georgia Review article about postbellum Southern volunteerism, James Bonner wrote, quote, "From a statistical viewpoint, there is irrefutable evidence of the fact that throughout American history, no other section of the country has sent its youth to battle more freely than that has that of the South. In World War II, Texas A&M's military college provided more officers than did West Point and Annapolis combined. At the outbreak of World War II, the southern states had the highest proportion of volunteer enlistments to induction. On a national average, it was 50%, but in Georgia, it was 93%, Texas, 99%, Kentucky, 123%. So great was the volunteer enlistment that from the South that an Alabama congressman opined that it is necessary to start selective service to geographically even out the manpower burden. That's what all I have to say. Thank you.
I want to thank all our speakers to this point. Mr. Parker, Alan Parker. Is there a Mr. Parker on this call? We'll move to Mr. David McAllister.
I'm David McAllister. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Would you like to make a statement, sir?
Yes.
Go ahead, sir. The floor is
I'm
yours,
a
sir.
representative of the Judah P. Benjamin Camp of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which was dedicated to honoring the diversity of the Southern people in the Civil War, especially the Jewish participation, as Judah P. Benjamin was a U.S. Senator and a Secretary of War for the CSA. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I served 4 years. We oppose the implementation of the Naming Commission's recommendation to remove the Moses Ezekiel Reconciliation Monument because it's anti-Semitic, unraveling reconciliation, extra legal, outside the remit of enabling legislation. We request this body issue an advisory report stating that the Army must not remove the memorial because in order to do so is extra legal. To do so, it's a grave marker for a cemetery and a Jewish veteran, Moses Ezekiel, and the 500 graves it marks. Whoever doesn't want reconciliation can only want more division. The return of secularism and the things that led us to the reason we had the Reconciliation Monument, and it will be an international embarrassment, as the previous speaker noted. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mary Stevens?
Yes, I'm there. Can you see and hear me now? Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. The exact date that slaves came to America is debatable, but slaves were brought to America from the 1600s to the 1800s by the states of New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. No Confederate flags are on any of the slave ships. If anybody has a picture of a slave ship with a Confederate flag on it, let me know. So, but the South inherited, the American states inherited slavery. You might want to read, if anybody wants to, the Crittenden-Johnson, this may be backwards, the Crittenden-Johnson Resolution, Crittenden, Crittenden-Johnson Resolution, that states that the war is over when the South returns to the Union, which I believe was the purpose of the war, to force the South back into the Union. So please issue a report stating that the Army must not remove the Arlington Monument because current order is wrong, as it is a grave marker for the Jewish veteran Moses Ezekiel, who designed the monument, and the 500 graves that it serves as a marker for, and that are buried there around the monument. I thank you for listening to me, and I speak for also for my mother in heaven and my great grandfather that served. Thank you.
Thank you. H.K. Edgerton? Edgerton?
Edgerton. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Honorable members of this committee, my name is H.K. Edgerton. I am a United States Army veteran who served as a teacher of basic and advanced electronics at the United States Army Signal Corps School Brigade at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. I have had the honor of speaking at the Reconciliation Memorial at Arlington, Virginia, and feel strongly that my civil rights and those of the ordinary citizens of the South are being unconstitutionally targeted with the planned removal and desecration of this shrine that President McKinley and President Taft so stated would be a lasting memorial of the renewal of friendship between the factions of this nation that were torn apart with war. Therefore, I so honorably ask that this committee send an advisory report to stop this unwarranted removal and desecration that would only serve to reopen old wounds that have healed in the whole by the presence of this shrine, as so stated by nearly every commander-in-chief since its inaugural unveiling. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you, sir. Linnell Siegel? Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Jonathan Jack Schwell? Probably said your name wrong, sir.
Yes, Shul, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. First, I want to thank the committee for arranging this opportunity for all of us to speak today. I noticed that something that I think the chairperson said at the beginning was that your efforts of the committee is to improve the quality of the visitors' experience at Arlington. And I would argue that when you if this monument is removed, the opposite would happen. I also note the name of this subcommittee called Remember and Explore. And what I would say that if the monument is removed, so is the memory, which is not your charge as a committee. We believe that the Army must not remove the monument because, as others have said, the order is extra legal and it is a grave marker for Moses Ezekiel and the 500 soldiers who are buried there. Moses Ezekiel's final wish before his death was to be buried there, and I would ask the committee if they believe they have any obligation to honor his wishes. Also, does the Army have any obligation to honor the pledge made by the federal government to the wives, mothers, and daughters of the dead soldiers who are buried here? Does the Army have any obligation to respect the people on both sides of the conflict who planned and built this monument in the name of reconciliation, which is what it was called and what we still, as you have called it too, as it was termed then and now? And you did mention earlier, I appreciate that. I think the Admiral or someone said that the Army would get comments from people who live in the area and descendants. I didn't hear that word, but I hope that you would get comments from the descendants of the families or of those who are buried in the cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant Colonel John Coffindaffer. Mr. Coffindaffer. Mr. Lyons, sir. Mr. Kirk Lyons.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Yes, my name is Kirk D. Lyons. I am from a career Air Force family and I'm an attorney and live in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I am shocked and scandalized that the Army would consider removing and desecrating Moses Ezekiel's Reconciliation Monument, an irreplaceable art masterpiece, and his headstone, by the way. I virtually attended the November 7th to 8th, 2022 meeting of the Arlington National Cemetery Committee and was one of the scheduled speakers. I and others were not allowed to speak, in my humble opinion, contrary to the Administrative Procedures Act. Further in that meeting, Council chastised one of your members for defending retention of the Reconciliation Monument and was admonished wrongly that the committee could not advise to retain, as that was a, quote, done deal, unquote. That member, by the way, who tried to talk for retention should get an apology. That was incorrect advice, as the staff attorney should have known, and this subcommittee could and should advise the Army that the Ezekiel art masterpiece, the Confederate Reconciliation Memorial, should be retained in its current location in perpetuity as was intended. Demolition will destroy an irreplaceable piece of the public art that belongs to all Americans. Demolition of the masterpiece of the first internationally acclaimed American Jewish sculptor smacks of anti-Semitism of the worst sort, as it could be considered cultural genocide and a crime against humanity, crimes prosecuted by the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg and investigated by the United Nations under the United Nations Charter on Human Rights today. Demolition or removal of the memorial and the Naming or Blaming Commission's recommendations harms my family because it stigmatizes as traitors my numerous Confederate ancestors, many who fought and some who died on far-flung American battlefields, far from home, bodies never recovered or even given decent burial. to repel an illegal invasion of their homes and farms. The Reconciliation Memorial Cenotaph is their memorial, is their headstone that they never got, as much as it is Sir Moses Ezekiel's headstone. I beg you, my family begs you, rule against this insidious, woke, cancel culture decision. Summon your courage and
Sir,
vote.
your time's expired, sir. My
Thank you.
apologies.
Thank you.
Sir, this is Lieutenant Colonel Coffindaffer. My cell phone was not able to transmit to you. Can you hear me now?
Sir, yes, I can, sir. I'll give you the floor at this point, sir. If you could say your name for me one more time, sir.
Yes, this is Lieutenant Colonel John Coffindaffer. Good afternoon, and I thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm a United States Air Force retired veteran, Combat Air Rescue Command pilot, 21 years active duty, 14 countries, 4 wars, 2 major offensives, and am one of the nearly 100 million Americans that have ancestors that served for the Confederacy. Knowing that my time is short, I request that this body issue an advisory report stating that the Army must not remove the Ezekiel Reconciliation Memorial because the order to do so is illegal. First and foremost, it is a grave marker of Moses Jacob Ezekiel, a Jewish American veteran who stated that his memorial, quote, is the crowning achievement of my career, and for the nearly 500 American graves it marks. As mentioned previously, it is also illegal to remove it because no community feedback whatsoever has been offered to date. President Woodrow Wilson dedicated the Reconciliation Memorial as an emblem of united people, quote. Also, Presidents Grant, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Harding all honored Ezekiel and the Southern War dead, recognizing him as one of America's greatest artists, honoring his memory, and proclaiming him a great American. In short, this is an exercise in raw political power. Ezekiel is quoted in saying, in reality, no one in the South would have raised their arm to fight for slavery. It was an evil we inherited and wanted to get rid of. Our struggle was simply of a constitutional one based on the states' rights and especially on free trade and no tariff, end quote. Rhetorically, by what moral authority do today's woke military and Congress threaten to remove the Reconciliation Memorial, which honors these American graves? Has the elite leftist usurpers taken into itself the right to determine who is and who is not an American? Is this a question to be determined as a political litmus test? Are we not all Americans, folks? Sir, thank you for the time to speak. Over.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have Garrick Sapp.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to make a statement today. My father is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. He was a career naval officer from North Carolina and flew combat missions in Vietnam for 2 tours. While I can't be certain he would agree with all I'm about to say, I believe he would, and I say it in his honor. There are 3 reasons you must stop the destruction of the Confederate Memorial in Arlington National Cemetery. The first is that it is the right thing to do. It is right to let those who decided to erect the monument a century ago to continue to be heard. It is the height of arrogance to think we know better than the Union veterans who attended the unveiling. Who are we to say 3 presidents of the United States were wrong? One of them was a Union veteran. It is right to let their efforts at reconciliation be a beacon for today and the future. The second reason to save the Ezekiel Monument to Reconciliation is that the calls for its destruction are political, even in the military. General Mark Milley is on record calling Southerners who fought for the Confederacy traitors. He did this while testifying in Congress. The vice chair of the Naming Commission, Ty Sedgley, called Confederates traitors in a celebratory tweet announcing the completion of the Naming Commission's reports. Those of you on the committee, some of you may agree that Confederate leaders were traitors, but that is a political view. It's as political now as it was when Thaddeus Stevens and other Republicans in Congress said the same thing in the 1860s. No Confederate was ever tried for treason. The third reason is that you have an opportunity to turn the tide, to say enough is enough. Confederates are low-hanging fruit. Think just for a minute. We are contemplating.
Sir?
Yes?
Sir, unfortunately, sir, your time's expired.
Okay.
I apologize, sir. Next, we have Ross Miracle. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Kennedy.
Commo check, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
My name is Lieutenant Colonel Ed Kennedy. I'm a retired Army infantry officer and a professional military historian. I have 29 years in uniform, having enlisted during Vietnam. I taught the graduate corps curriculum for Civil War history and Civil War electives at the Army's Command and General Staff College on active duty, then as a retiree. I retired after 19 years on faculty. Other than Colonel Torrance, I believe I am the only other Army 5 X-ray skill qualified military historian involved here. He lives coincidentally a mile from my house. Primary purpose of my talk is a request that you advise the Secretary of the Army that the Naming Commission has not complied with the law. Therefore, its recommendations relating to the Confederate Memorial cannot be legally implemented. The Memorial New South should not be illegally destroyed or removed. The Secretary should be so advised. Destroying cemetery memorials violates law and our military doctrine. It's un-American. The remit of the Naming Commission was not to give carte blanche license to erase grave memorials and markers in cemeteries. Laws passed by the representatives of the people should not be undone with an unelected bureaucracy. The Naming Commission has intentionally failed to consider the opinions of others outside their biased historical interpretations. The Naming Commission should not assume that they're more intelligent or wiser than the legion of leaders, including presidents, one being a Union Army veteran who saw fit to allow a memorial to be placed in Arlington as part of national reconciliation. I taught counterinsurgency tactics to our officers going to Iraq and Afghanistan. It is totally ironic that we taught them in our doctrine and emphasize it, respect for others' cultures. It's intended to make the return to peace easier. We violate those same norms when dealing with our own countrymen and their culture by destroying their mementos, monuments, and memorials to their ancestors. I again request that you advise the Secretary to follow the rule of law and our joint doctrine, respect the culture of those whose ancestors lie in the shadow of this memorial. Please do not undo reconciliation. Over.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Lotta, can I ask you to please turn your camera off?
My apologies.
You'll be called on soon.
Yeah, I apologize.
Thank you, sir. Martin O'Toole.
Camo check. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir, and we can see you as well. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for your service. My father was a captain of infantry in the European theater, the Second World War. He is interred at Arlington. And so the National Cemetery has a meaning for me, as well personal as well as historical and the like. I agree with those who've said before that the advisory committee should at least consider sending a report to the Secretary outlining the problems that these people have talked about more eloquently than I can. So I'll go to a more personal turn, since I think we've covered the law and the history pretty well, just to say that aside from the horrible nature of this proposal, it's bad history. It repudiates reconciliation. It's bad. It's almost like the Taliban destroying artwork. It's a tremendous piece of art. I've been up there and looked at it. In Georgia, where I'm from, we have had this conversation that they said the state flag had to change. Then they said the monuments in public squares had to go, but what we should keep were things in cemeteries and museums. But now apparently we're coming for things in cemeteries that are actual grave markers for the deceased. So it's just, we shouldn't be demanding conformity in the name of diversity. And the professionally discontented will never be satisfied. They continue to move on and do things like this. It's positively Orwellian, in my opinion. So I have Confederate ancestry. I'm a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Is my family going to consider itself to be unwelcome to come to the National Cemetery if we remove monuments to the sacrifices and heroism of Confederate ancestors? Should my father's ashes be removed from the National Cemetery? I think this is all a dreadful thing. We have a momentary political majority that wants to take eternal monuments and values and destroy them. It's something that should not be tolerated. The advisory committee should advise. That is your task, I think. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and God bless these United States. Over.
Thank you, sir. Theron Walker.
Combo check, over.
Loud and clear, sir.
I'm Theron Walker. Good afternoon from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm glad to have the chance to speak to the committee on the critical matter of the proposed removal of the Confederate or Reconciliation Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. The monument, though over a century old, was still approved and built only a handful of decades after the end of the war between the states. This was an era when the living veterans from that conflict, the men who struggled mortally against each other, were able to reconcile and both figuratively and literally shake hands. The monument and its dedication in 1914 represent reconciliation and unification. The so-called naming commission is completely outside of its remit in attempting to remove this monument. Additionally, to attempt to remove it clearly repudiates and renounces the worthy goal of reconciliation in which it was erected, not to mention disrespecting the American war dead interred there. I strongly advocate the committee issue an advisory opinion to the Secretary of the Army to delete this recommendation. I'll conclude with a quote from one of the several war monuments that the Republic of Turkey maintains honoring former enemy soldiers who fell in the Gallipoli campaign during World War I. Quote, "To those heroes who shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us where they lie side by side. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives in this land, they have become our sons as well." Kemal Ataturk, First President, Republic of Turkey, 1934, end quote. We here in the USA should follow this civilized and gracious example and cease considering removing monuments to our fallen sons in our soil. Thank you, and I yield further time.
Thank you, sir. Terry Kilma.
Good afternoon, Terry Klima.
Thank you, sir. My apologies.
Not a problem. I'm here as a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans Maryland Division, and I would like to request that this body issue an advisory report stating that the Army must not remove the memorial because the order to do so is extra legal, as it is a grave marker in a cemetery for Jewish veteran Moses Ezekiel in the 500 graves of the American military veterans it marks. Recall that the memorial was to reconcile and unite the country after a bloody fratricidal war. How can anything positive come about from the removal of this memorial? An action so completely antithetical to its original intended purpose of reconciliation. Be mindful that the opposite of reconciliation is alienation, estrangement. Is this what we as a country now desire? Note also the long-established military tradition of Southerners serving this country's military, dating back to the country's founding. It was Southerners who protected Washington's retreat at the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, saving the young Continental Army from complete annihilation. To this day, the South provides a disproportionate number of our new military recruits than any other region of the country. The meaning, the service, and sacrifice of our American military veterans. Yes, our American military veterans, who were once treated with dignity and respect, but whose grave sites and memorial are now being threatened by the actions of the naming commission, is clearly divisive, counterproductive, and unacceptable. Thank you. Out.
Thank you, sir. Mike Hill. Mike Hill. Move on to Bert Jones.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. You have a bit of an echo, sir.
My name is Bert Jones. I'm a Southern American, and I like to think that I'm 100% part of this great country. All my ancestors were Confederates, and after the war between the states, they rebuilt the South and contributed to the process of building this great country to what it is today. They were honored veterans of World War I and World War II. I like to think that I served my country by participating in the team that landed the first man on the moon. I was a design engineer that worked on a lunar rover vehicle that helped the astronauts traverse the moon's surface. I worked on numerous space experiment satellites that the Air Force had. And I concluded my career on the inertial upper stage, which was an integral part of the space shuttle program. I am heartbroken and feel betrayed that my country is undertaking the removal of my Confederate heritage. I feel I'm just as much an American as folks from other parts of this great country, and my history may be different, but it's still American history. And myself and my ancestors have done our part in building this country. I beg you not to allow our history to be erased. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Marshall Hester. Marshall Hester. J. David Bennett.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Okay.
Okay.
I thank you for your service today. And I just have a couple of remarks I'd like to make in regard to the reconfiguration of the memorial to bring our country together. I want to look back at what the actual soldiers did after the Civil War. During a time when the South didn't have much spare cash, they had raising money for a monument to young Sam Davis. And the Confederates didn't contribute much money. Almost all the money for that monument came from Union soldiers that respected young Sam Davis. He was a young man in his early 20s, and he was caught in Pulaski, Tennessee, and by the Union forces, and General Dodge had to force him to give up men that were considered to be spies. And he said he would not give up those names because if he had 1,000 lives, he would give them all rather than betray a friend. And they killed him. And as I said, the Union soldiers had so much respect for him. They have paid to erect a monument here in Tennessee to young Sam Davis. That's how the participants felt. I don't know why we're now looking at people that didn't participate in the war to decide what needs to be done with the monuments in the South, particularly those paid for by the taxpayers. And so therefore, I would ask the naming commission to cease and desist all attempts to remove this reconciliation monument there in Arlington. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Lutta?
Good afternoon, ma'am. Are you able to hear and see me all right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll introduce myself during my comments. Please let me know when you'd like me to begin.
Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. God's word, the Holy Bible, says, "Remove not the ancient landmark which your fathers have set." I request that this body issue an advisory report stating that the Army must not remove the Reconciliation Memorial because the order to do so is extra legal and because it is a grave marker and a cemetery both for Jewish veteran Moses Ezekiel and 500 others. I'm Reverend Dr. Stan Latta, a lifelong Southerner. My family came to Virginia centuries ago from a land grant from King Charles II. My family has served our country from the American Revolution to the present. I have served our American military with Red Cross and USO. I've worked for the federal government and Fortune 500 companies and been a sworn appointed public official at local, county, and state levels for over 30 years. I have family buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and disturbing their burial ground is nothing but savage and deliberate ignominy. If a Union soldier, later U.S. president, could preside over a cornerstone dedication ceremony describing, quote, "a beautiful monument to the heroic dead of the South," and calling the ceremony, quote, "a benediction of all true Americans," why do we destroy it now? George Washington arguably illegally fought against the British, but do we tear down all of Washington, D.C.? Heaven forbid. My ancestors, none of them slave owners, lawfully seceded from the South and fought against the North due to states' rights issues. And now everything they were is being systematically desecrated. Why is there a double standard? The Reconciliation Monument needs to stand and must remain. Tearing it down does not bring more reconciliation, but less. Destroying works of art and grave markers in cemeteries is not right, but wrong. I leave you again with Proverbs 22:28. God says, "Remove not the ancient landmark which thy fathers have set." Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ernest Everett Blevins? Mr. Blevins? Robert Lee Hodge?
Hello. Thank you for letting me speak. Firstly, I request that the commission issue an advisory report stating that the Army must not remove the memorial because the order to do so is extra legal to do so, as it is a grave marker in a cemetery to veteran Moses Ezekiel. I was on the committee to reinterpret Arlington House in 2013. I lived in Arlington for 23 years. I would regularly visit the grave marker. I worked for Time Life Books as a principal civil war researcher for 5 years in the National Park Service and worked at the National Archives for 15 years. I'm from Ohio. I've been to hundreds of historical sites since I was 4 years old, museums, battlefields, and monuments. The monuments and the people that visit them are passive and tranquil. The academic and media-fueled argument that these sculptures are magnets of so-called white supremacy are simply false narratives. As I have always had high regard for the United States military, my ancestors fought in all American wars dating back to the Revolution. My father fought in World War II in the 1st Cav Division. His ancestors were poor farmers that volunteered to defend the South as they saw it and were Confederate cavalrymen. The highest ranking American casualty in World War II was Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., killed at Okinawa. His father was a Confederate general. I always thought it was liberal in the classic sense that the United States let former Confederate states put up monuments to their fallen. In the economically deprived South, it was the women that led the efforts to remember their fathers, their brothers, their sons and sweethearts. This was done heavily around the 50th anniversary of the war between the states, when the northern towns were putting monuments to their dead up as well. The Jim Crow narrative is simply false. Some believe efforts to remove monuments to Southern soldiers is a form of ethnic cleansing. Some feel there is nothing liberal about the effort to remove the monument, but totalitarian and authoritarian based on emerging cultural Marxism. Based on what is happening, I have empathy with such thoughts. More than 90 million Americans are related to Confederate soldiers. I hope you can see these actions undermine confidence in the United States being truly liberal. I thought the Civil War was over. The
Sir,
presentism.
your time has expired, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. John Goddard.
Thank you. I'm Dr. John Goddard. I'd like to say preserve this monument where it is. I'm a veteran. I was born in Richmond where Ezekiel was born. My great-grandfather was a private in the Richmond Grays Company at the time when Moses Ezekiel's older brother was a private. He likely knew the teenager Moses at that time. They were Virginians and Americans, and they loved their country. I believe most veterans, most regular workaday folks get the true meaning of this monument. They see it because they are still in touch with a true wisdom and see the heart of things that are true, good, and beautiful. They see a young Sergeant Moses Ezekiel walking barefoot amid the mud and blood of a battlefield to find his wounded comrade, 17-year-old Thomas Garland Jefferson, then caring for him for 2 days to his last breath, and then preparing the body for burial with honor. Most regular folks are able to see this and understand what it is, a noble act of love and faithfulness to his comrade. And they can see this monument as an expression of that love for his comrades and for his country, one worthy of honor. The Confederate plot and place for the monument at Arlington were granted in trust by the U.S. Congress and U.S. President early in the 20th century. It was a promise made to that generation and all future generations. Moses Ezekiel constructed the monument at cost. He created beautiful art from a spirit of love that is the source of all truly good art from the hand of man. He loved this monument and is buried at its base. The current proposal to remove the monument breaks the promise made many years ago. It demonstrates a faithlessness and the duty required of this government to keep its promises and care for these veterans buried there. In 1917, Moses Ezekiel died while volunteering with the Red Cross, caring for wounded troops on the Italian front in World War I, as he once cared for his friend Thomas. A veteran can see by what spirit this man lived and the love of country that he expressed through his art. To the government and to this committee, keep this promise made to him and to these veterans buried around the monument. Do not break the bonds of trust made to them. Be faithful to them and keep this monument where it is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Valerie Protopopoulos. Valerie Protopopoulos. Jean Kaiser. Sir, we can see you.
Okay, can you
There
hear
you
me
go.
now?
Now we can hear you, sir.
Okay,
Floor is yours,
great.
sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your service. My name is Gene Kaiser Jr. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, historian, a publisher. And 40 years ago, I ran the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, and it ended in Arlington National Cemetery. I was thrilled to be on those sacred grounds. I ran the race with a black headband on and a little American flag in the back of it, the whole race. And when I crossed the finish line, I took that flag out and held it up, and all the Marines were cheering, and it was just a real thrill. Arlington National Cemetery, of course, is such a special place. And if you remove the Confederate memorial, the Confederate monument, that degrades and desecrates Arlington National Cemetery for all time. I mean, how can you have 500 graves in concentric circles around a mangled shaft sticking up or nothing there? It's a desecration of Arlington National Cemetery, and I wish you would please issue an advisory not to remove the Confederate memorial. A lot of people are supporting the Confederate memorial now to stay in place, like Governor Youngkin of Virginia. And we believe that it was an error for the naming commission. The memorial is not in their remit. The memorial is about reconciliation and not about honoring the Confederacy. It's for the greatest reasons, our country coming back together. And I would like to, a lot of people have said things about points of history back then, but President Eisenhower, Supreme Commander in World War II, who's buried there at Arlington, he had someone write him one time and said, "Why do you have a picture of General Robert E. Lee on your wall?" And he took the time out about a week later to write back to this gentleman, and this is what he said. "Dear Dr. Scott, respecting your August 1st inquiry, calling attention to my often expressed admiration for General Robert E. Lee, I would say first that we need to understand that at the time of the war between the states, the issue of secession had remained unresolved for more than 70 years. Men of probity, character, public standing, and unquestioned loyalty, both North and South, had disagreed on this issue as a matter of principle from the day our Constitution was adopted. General Robert E. Lee was, in my estimation, one of the supremely gifted men produced by our nation. He believed unswervingly in the constitutional validity of his cause, which until 1865 was still an arguable question in America. He was poised."
Sir, your time's expired, sir.
All right, thank you.
My apologies, sir.
No problem, thank you.
Mr. Al Arnold.
Yes, thank you. I come from the great state of Mississippi. Thank the committee for allowing me to speak as an African-American man who was born and raised here. 2015, I wrote a book about my ancestor who was a slave. He was a slave of General Nathan Bedford Forrest. He served with Robert E. Lee in the Civil War. And I want to make a defense. Obviously, my white Southern brothers have no defense. It breaks my heart to hear them cry. It breaks my heart to hear them weep. They have been thrown off as outcasts among us in society. But I make my defense on 3 accounts. For 8 years now, I have traveled among the white Southern brothers and sisters of mine. Martin Luther King said, "One day the sons of slaves and sons of slave owner will be able to sit down at the table of brotherly love." Well, guess what? I've been to Arlington, and I've been to 14 states, and I've sat with these people. And I'm here to tell you that my first defense is that these are just people. They're mothers and fathers and uncles and brothers. But let me give you 2 other defenses that you probably won't hear. There's a song called Amazing Grace. Barack Obama led that church in South Carolina in that song. That song was written by a slave trader named John Newton. I see no African-American in this country ready to take Amazing Grace, that hymn, out of the black church. Every Sunday we sing that song, Amazing Grace. And it was 7 years after Newton wrote that song that he stopped trading slaves. My last defense is the American Indian. The 5 civilized tribes of the American Indians, every one of them had African-American slaves. I see no African-Americans crying that they don't go into casinos, that they don't support. To this day, the federal government support the 5 civilized tribes to restore the Cherokee. I've met people in the Cherokee Nation. I have met the Creek Queen. This is the greatest hypocrisy portrayed upon America by African Americans, and probably the greatest hypocrisy in the history of this country. And it breaks my heart. And I'm just a regular black man. I don't make money, make my living by the book that I wrote. I'm a physical therapist by profession, and that's how I make my money. I would ask that this committee strongly consider what they're doing. If you remove this monument, you don't show how far we have come as a country. You share, and you will show how far we have to go. You will show how far we have to go. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Yes, sir. Wade Alford. Mr. Wade Alford. I'd like to go back to Mr. Alan Parker. Mr. Parker, are you on the line? Ross Miracle. Mike Hill. Marshall Hester.
Ms. Yates,
Who's speaking, sir?
this is Wade Alford.
Yes, sir. Sir, the floor is yours, sir.
Okay, I just want to request this body issue an advisory report stating the Army must not remove the memorial because the order to do so is extra legal. It's a grave marker in a cemetery for a Jewish veteran and the 500 graves that it marks. And as I said earlier, whoever doesn't want this reconciliation monument can only want division, return to sectionalism, things that led us there to the reason for it being there. And this is just another power grab and a reason to continue division and hate in this country. An alternate version of history. We're all probably always going to disagree about the causes, but why should we keep going there and digging up people and destroying monuments? And this has got to stop. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Again, Mr. Marshall Hester. Mr. Hester, is that you trying to speak, sir? Valerie Protapas? Valerie Protapas? Mr. Chairman, at this time, other than those names I've called several times at the individuals that have not spoken up, I think we've gone through the list of those who've previously asked to speak. We
Sir,
do have one hand raised. Can I ask you speaking, sir?
Yes, Lieutenant Colonel John Coffindaffer. Sir, respectfully request that you give a couple minutes. I don't know what happened on my cell phone. I could hear you all. You could not hear me, so I transferred to a landline. I respectfully request that you give a couple minutes, continue on with some business, but allow those to try to call in another means to go ahead and express their views. Thank you. Out.
Hey, Renee.
Yes, sir.
I had, and thanks everybody. Just if you would just bear with us for a few minutes as we work through the remainder of the list. I had another name that I thought we missed, Mr. Ernest Everett Blevins. I'm not sure if we heard from him or not, but I had a blank on that one. Over.
Roger, sir. I was going to read through the names one more time, and if someone is on the call and for some reason can't speak, if you can put something in the chat to let us know. And then I also, sir, there are a couple folks that are asking to speak that had not submitted previously and have asked to say something. So we can defer to that once I read through the list one more time, sir.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm good with that. So read through the list and then we'll ask in a controlled manner if there's somebody that we did not have on the list, and we'll give them a couple minutes, 2.5 minutes if that number's reasonable. Over.
Tracking, sir. Mr. Alan Parker. Ross Miracle. Mike Hill. Ernest Blevins. Valerie Protapas. So that concludes the list. We do have two individuals, Mr. Bert Clements. If you approve, I'll give the floor to him for a minute and a half.
So much. I don't have a prepared statement. I didn't know I had to ask in advance, but I appreciate the opportunity. I echo the sentiments of everyone that has spoken. Amazing statements. I'm a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans here in Virginia. My second great grandfather is buried less than 100 miles from here. I've visited Arlington Cemetery many times, seen the monument. My second great grandfather's father fought in the War of 1812 against the British to protect our freedom for the United States. And, I just ask, this is a monument, this is a beautiful work of art. And we need to remember that horrible, terrible war so that it never happens again, right? It's a monument of reconciliation, and it's a work of art with the woman handing over the olive branch, and it would be just a horrible point in our history to remove that monument. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. All right. And Spencer Harris. Spencer Harris, you've requested a minute to speak.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everyone for hearing us out. There's some people who've told some great things about this beautiful statue of Moses Ezekiel. We know this is a gorgeous statue. We know this is a great historical monument here and a hallowed ground for our nation. As the father of two young girls, I'm proud to bring them around to these different memorials and monuments and show them what our history is, show them what our country stands for. And I ask that you leave this alone. I do second the thoughts of many of my compatriots here today, and that I do believe these proceedings are the movement to remove this monument is done illegally and should be halted. But please do leave these monuments. Let's leave our history so that we can show it to other generations and allow individuals to raise their children to be proud to be American and to be Southern and to show that it's okay. I thank you for your time. I ask you to greatly consider leaving this monument alone, and I appreciate y'all's time today.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walter Kotapich.
Yeah, she said it pretty close. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Just a quick comment. And by the way, I apologize for not doing this in advance. I have done so in advance for the Honor Committee subcommittee meeting. So I am concerned here that if we start removing Confederate monuments and now in cemeteries, I am concerned we are starting to erase history. So I think that concern needs to be noted and put on the record that it is kind of a problem. But that was my only comment I had here on this one. I have a lot more on other topics not related to this.
Thank you, sir. And then Mr. Edward Phillips, sir.
Thank you so much. This is Edward Phillips. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear, sir.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm the National Public Affairs Officer for the Sons of Confederate Veterans headquartered in Columbia, Tennessee. And suffice it to say, we do oppose this being removed. And out of all fairness, my great-great-grandfathers from East Tennessee all fought in the U.S. Army in the Civil War. My uncles and one third great-grandfather and some first cousins fought in the Confederate States Army. I'm a member of the Sons of Union Veterans as well, but I'm not here on their behalf. What I can tell you is that this monument, as everyone has said, is in fact, or as many have said, is a grave marker. All you see from Moses Ezekiel is a simple footstone because his headstone is his sculpture. And we believe that it is outside the remit. We believe that it is a grave marker. And further, the Naming Commission even said or suggested that there needs to be proper scaffolding so not to interfere with the graves, because these graves are within 2 to 3 feet of the base of the monument, unlike, for example, the USS Maine, which the first buried from the Maine are at least 30 feet away from its base. So I think this monument's been misclassified, and I think that it is in fact a grave marker. It should not be part of the remit. And I also underscore the express bias of at least one member of the naming commission with his book, Robert Lee and Me. On page 162, he talked about, of all the thousands of Confederate monuments throughout the United States, the one at Arlington angered him the most. And it's obvious to see that that is part and parcel of why he was chosen for the naming commission and why this recommendation is being made. And it's unfortunate. I hate that he feels that way, but I think as Americans, we should really reconsider the fact that this is for reconciliation. It is to bring the fractured parts of a nation together. That's what it did, and it continues to do that today. So I would respectfully request that the subcommittee provide a report to the advisory committee recommending that this monument not be removed, that the Reconciliation Memorial still stand at Arlington, and that these graves of almost 500 Confederate veterans and their spouses not be desecrated and dishonored for all time with a gaping hole that will be left there once the monument is removed. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this meeting, and I appreciate all that was done today. Over.
Thank you, sir. I'll ask again at this time if there's anyone on the call from the public that would like to have 2.5 minutes to speak. I would ask you to put your name in the chat. Mr. Chairman, hearing none, I turn the floor over to you following this. This concludes the public comment period of this meeting. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. And before I open it up to the subcommittee for discussion, I want to echo Renee's comments and thank everybody for your participation today. Heartwarming, passion, and emotion in your comments. Personally, I just want to clarify a couple things. The subcommittee doesn't have the authority to not do the review and the process that we're going through. It's not our decision. We must execute the 106 process, and then, as all of you have requested, we will make a recommendation to the full committee, who then will make a recommendation, the advisory recommendation or the advisory report on our position. So I just want that to be clear. And as we indicated at the beginning of the second part of this meeting, our second topic, this is just the beginning of the process. There will be more opportunity for public engagement, and there will be many of opportunities for you to present your thoughts and concerns as we have meetings that will last probably 6, 7, 8 months. And so I just wanted to clarify that and make sure everybody understands that, you know, we are a subcommittee who can make a recommendation to the full committee, who then makes a recommendation forward if that's what the committee chooses to do. With that, I will pause. Subcommittee members, this is our time for discussion. I would ask any subcommittee member, if you have thoughts, please come up on the net and let's discuss. Over.
Thank you, Mark. This is Rosemary Williams, and thank you for the public comment. While we don't have the authority to make a higher level decision at the committee level, at this level, subcommittee level, it's important that we hear the passion and the reasoning from the public. This is what makes federal advisory committees work. So my gratitude for taking the time, everyone, to issue comment. My question is, the referring to the statute as reconciliation, is that codified anywhere, or is that sort of the nomenclature that's been adopted? Over.
Yes, Ms. Williams, I will see is Dr. Carney still on the call? And if he is not, Dr. Steve Carney is the ANC historian. I will attempt to answer the question.
Thank you. That's it for me, Renee. Over.
Dr. Carney, are you on the call? So the statute, so everyone's aware, the Confederate Memorial does not have a particular name in that regard. So it has been referred to at times as the Reconciliation Monument because it was placed, the time and for which it was placed. So we can be prepared to provide you a further background. Ms. Williams, I think the rest of the committee heard some of that previously. But we can provide you more information related to the history of the monument. It is also on our website, so I can make sure that the committee members know where to find that on our website. Does that answer your question for right now?
Yeah. So one, I echo Rosemary and Mark's comments about the passion, and really appreciate the DFOs making a place for us to be able to hear that. My question is more on a procedural matter. A lot of the arguments talked about in scope versus out of scope. I suspect the legal agreement, the courts will decide that, right? Is that accurate, Renee?
That is correct.
Okay, all right. And so, in some sense, waiting for that decision to actually come down would allow us to figure out from a perspective, at least with the advisement of the law, whether that is a valid argument. Okay, I'm good. Thank you. I really appreciate the passion of everybody and the time they've spent and invested in this.
Mark, this is Amy. I agree. We're at the. If I understand it correctly, from what Colonel Austin said, and then from what you guys have explained, we're at the beginning of this, and several of the speakers said, you know, that the local people have not had an opportunity to make comments on this, so they will have the opportunity through this process to make comments. But Arlington is more than a local. It's a local concern, but Arlington is really a national treasure. So there will be comments outside the local community. I'd like to also echo what people have said to those people that took the time to prepare comments, and to those that came in at the end and made their comments extemporaneously. Thank you very much. This is a national, Arlington, as I said, is a national treasure. The renaming procedure has been a national experience, and it has been truly an emotional experience from the beginning and continues to be so. No one that I have spoken with does not have an opinion on how this has been treated and the outcome of the naming commission. Everyone has an opinion on it. So I think this has been great that all of you who have participated today have taken it upon yourselves to take the time and come to us and share with us what your opinion is. And there is a lot of emotion. We've heard that in your voices, and we appreciate that. And so I think we will be able to take the time to this process to go back to the full committee and advise them how we see the situation and how we think the full committee should advise. That's our job. So there's lots of views to be shared and lots of questions to be answered. And I think when we meet with the full committee next week, we can give them our going in position. And I think you've helped us to formulate that. So under Mark's supervision and Renee's guidance, I think we can take a, give a going in position, and as the process continues, we'll take your inputs into consideration as we formulate what we think we should go forward with. So thank you very much for all your input. I think it was very helpful.
Yeah, let me follow that up. For those of you on the public, we still see your messages, right? That you're typing in the chat. However, that the public portion of this is really over. But I just want to give you a couple departing thoughts, right? There are a lot of members on the advisory committee to Arlington that is very familiar with these processes. And just one example that will drive home the point I'm trying to make. Today, when we started, we had about 32 names that were interested in speaking to us today. By my count, we added 4 at the end that were not had not requested additional comments. The Section 106 process, as we get into it, is very in-depth and it's very long, and it grows in magnitude exponentially. Most of you know we have a issue with eligibility because we're running out of grave space at Arlington National Cemetery. When we went through this process on that subject and that topic, we received over almost 300,000 comments that this body, this advisory committee, listened to, read, met with, and then every one of those comments informed the decision of the advisory committee and its recommendation higher. So I don't think I can overemphasize, and Renee can't overemphasize, that this is the beginning. And there are going to be numerous opportunities for everybody to weigh in. And then the courts will go through the process, the legal process for litigation. All of that will play a part before we get to a decision. And so I just ask you to keep your passion on the topic, stay engaged as we move forward, and continue to engage and use whatever resource you have that's available to you as we finalize a directive that was given to Arlington National Cemetery by the Secretary of Defense and approving the naming convention's recommendation. So I just ask you to hang with us. We're very familiar with this. It's a long process, and everybody gets their chance to provide input. And I will ask Renee to follow that up and correct me if I've said something wrong, or ask any other subcommittee members if there's any other discussion before we close. Over.
So before Ms. Duvall, I see your hand. One moment, please. It's important that that I correct only one thing, Mr. Farley, sir. What the committee members need to be aware of, the subcommittee members need to be aware and understand, is that the Department of Defense, Department of the Army, is taking an adverse action. That's the part of the 106 process. It's recognized that it's an adverse action. Therefore, we're going through the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106, and we will be working on mitigation and determination of where the proposed new location for the monument will be. It's important for us to understand that the decision to remove the memorial was made. It was recommended in accordance with law to Congress and the SecDef. Congress had a period of time to act in accordance with that law, and they did not. And so the Secretary of Defense is implementing those recommendations, and part of that process will be the Section 106 process, which includes interagency and public consultation period, which we're in to develop the mitigation strategy for the adverse effect, as well as the permanent location for the memorial.
Yeah, thank you, Renee. I appreciate that. That's why you're our designated federal officer. Keep us straight. Rose, please go ahead.
I just wanted to, well, thank Renee, because that was where my question was going. If she could just, clarify the 106 process so people understood on the public side what that meant. Granted, the renaming and everything comes down, and we look at it as a subcommittee and try and balance, because that's what we were brought in to do, is take a look at what was Arlington asked to do, and we're sort of the balance between the public and the directives that came down. Renee, you explained it beautifully to the public, and it was a nice recap. So that was my question. My hand was raised to ask Renee to explain the 106 process and where we fell in this, and she did that. That's all I had to say. And you're right, Mark. We've gone through this when it came to eligibility and how to prolong the life of Arlington, and now we'll go through that same process again as to what's the best path forward for this particular situation. Thank you.
Renee? Renee?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Since there are, excuse me, Mark, I don't want to butt in. May I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Renee, since you indicated earlier that there are, or we expect there to be legal action concerning the disposition of the memorial, correct?
So I can tell you that there are there have been two filings against naming the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Army, Department of the Army, regarding the removal of the memorial at Arlington National Cemetery. That's correct.
So will the 106 process be held in abeyance pending the legal action, or do we proceed on, and since we're not, we don't have any input into that legal action?
I am not an attorney. I must say that to everyone very clearly. But I have been informed and guided by the Office of General Counsel at Headquarters Department of the Army that we, Arlington National Cemetery, proceed with the process that we're currently taking, barring any injunction or an order to cease and desist.
Okay, I got it. So we proceed on until someone tells us otherwise.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am. So the cemetery is prepared to, and in the phase, as Colonel Austin described early on, we're beginning the phase of the Section 106 process that will begin with interagency consultation and then public engagement regarding the mitigation and the permanent location of the memorial.
Any other comments by any subcommittee members? I think the only one we haven't heard from is Bob, I believe. Over.
Yeah. Hey, Renee, just a quick question. So did you get any requests for comments in support of removing the monument?
Yes, we have.
And then those folks did not present their case here today?
No, but those comments were not in conjunction with this particular meeting. They were comments received after the naming commission recommendations were accepted by the Secretary of Defense. Over.
Okay. Is there anything that's on record that we can see?
There will be when we begin the actual consultation process and formulate those for public consumption.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. Any other subcommittee members have any comments? Okay. Renee, I think that's the end of the subcommittee discussion. Any closing comments from you before I asked for a motion to adjourn?
No, sir. Floor is yours.
Okay. Again, we don't have any questions, no hands are up. So I thank everybody for your participation today and for your input. We'll get the record on this, and then we'll have a discussion next week at the full committee, and we'll see how the full committee wants to adopt this. Not only this, but the other topic that we had earlier today on the Chaplain Monument up there on Chaplain's Hill. And I guess I'll see you guys next week in the National Capitol. Barring any other comments, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
I second the motion.
Okay, so we have a second. We have all in favor, just kind of acknowledge.
Aye.
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 All right, I see all of you, and I approve it. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good
Good job.
afternoon.
Bye.